bringing us to this beautiful room. As Councilwoman mentioned, my name is I'm the political director at Fight for Philly. We're a grassroots coalition of residents, community groups, faith-based groups, and labor groups united in the fight for good jobs, corporate accountability, and strong communities. We'd like to thank everyone here today, in particular some of our allied organizations. We have, of course, council members. We have Stan Shapiro from Neighborhood Networks. We have Fight for Philly members. We have Ian Moran from Education Voters, and lots of other community groups here representing and listening to this great new research. So without further ado, I want to introduce Sharon Ward, the Executive Director of Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center.
Thanks, Sam. For those of you who don't know, the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that does research and advocacy around state budget and state tax issues. And we believe that government is not the enemy, but provides important services that are important for quality of life and for economic growth. And we look at things from the standpoint of fair taxation and adequate revenue to support important public services. That's our organization. Has been around for about 6 years now. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over very briefly what's in our report. There are hard copies available in the back of the room for those of you who need them. We'll have some other speakers, and then we'll take questions, and I'm happy to go into more detail about our findings and about the report that we did. So, to start, I think we need to look at where we are in January of 2012. And unfortunately, it's not much better than we were in 2011 and 2010. Philadelphia, the state, and the nation are still recovering from the Great Recession, which drove unemployment to near record levels and devastated state and local governments, and their ability in particular to provide critical services. And certainly here in Philadelphia, you know very specifically the implications of this recession on citizens and on our city services. It's also a story about family and community devastation. We all know that individuals have still seen the retirement savings disappear. We know that we've been at record levels of foreclosure, and that despite a number of efforts, the economy is still not fully recovered. So one of the contributors, in addition to the recession, to the municipal financial distress we've seen here in Philadelphia, in the city, and also at the school district level, was the use of what are called qualified interest rate management agreements, QIRAs, or swaps, if you want to call them. Swaptions and other types of relatively complex financial derivatives, like the ones that we've heard a lot about in the context of the financial market collapses in the Great Recession. These are swaps, these interest rate swaps. Swaptions were used here and were used by school districts and local governments across the country, across the state, and they've been both controversial and costly. The Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center looked at what were the costs of these swaps to date, through July 2011, and what the costs might be moving forward. And again, this is in the context of having gone through several years of budget cuts, a $900 million cut in state support for education that has decimated, certainly hurt the school district of Philadelphia terribly, increased property taxes, increased sales taxes, and cuts to agencies across the city landscape. So we've looked at these costs of these swaps on city general obligation bonds, on several city agencies who also used interest rate swaps, and on the school district of Philadelphia. And findings are simple, but unfortunate. Through July 2011, the city paid about $170 million in swaps and swaptions. $170 million. Now, for those of you who care, this is a net number. This includes upfront payments that were received by the city agencies and interest payments that were made by banks. It also includes termination fees paid by city agencies, most notably on the general obligation bonds, to terminate these swaps and the interest costs to the city and its agencies. For the school district of Philadelphia, that cost is about $163 million. Now, I don't need to tell you the kind of difficulty that the school district has had, the concern over what was about a $37 million budget deficit for the year, and the contributing role that the cost of these swaps has played in undermining both the financial security and stability of the school district, in particular, and its ability to prevent cuts and to maintain services. Now, both the city agencies and the school district, when they recognized that these agreements that they had entered into were just a bad deal, took actions to terminate them. And much of the cost of the school district, for example, and a fair share of the cost of the city is in these termination agreements, that the termination termination fees paid to banks for the privilege of leaving these terrible and what proved to be very, very difficult financial arrangements. So, in addition to the cost today, the swaps have proven to be the gift that keeps on giving. At continued low interest rates, we've calculated what the maximum cost might be to the city. Again, there's a share of general obligation bonds, and then some of the city agencies, including the airport and others, continue to have outstanding swaps. And that cost could be as much as $245 million moving forward over the life of these swaps agreements. Now, even if the interest rates moderate, which they're likely to do over the course of time, the problem is that now we're at historic lows, we continue to be at historic lows for time moving forward, and these agreements will be very costly to these agencies right when we can't afford them. And I will explain to you what these swaps are later on, because they can be a little bit complicated. So you might ask, and the question that's probably on everyone's mind is, why did the city and school district enter into these agreements to begin with? And really, perhaps a better question is, why did any entity enter into these agreements? Why were they allowed to do so? And the answer is one that is not unfamiliar to those of us who have watched the financial crisis unfolding. The financial services industry lobbied in Washington to deregulate these instruments. States had authority to regulate them prior to 2000, and the industry worked to eliminate that authority. And they came to Harrisburg and lobbied for legislation which passed in 2003 that specifically authorized school districts and municipalities to enter into these agreements. And then the race was on. They were heavily marketed, and the school districts and entities took advantage of them. By 2009, almost 200 local governments across Pennsylvania, municipalities and school districts had entered into more than 600 swaps agreements. In a 2009 investigation, Auditor General Jack Wagner characterized these interest rate swaps as highly risky and impenetrably complex transactions that quite simply amount to gambling with public money. And he urged the Commonwealth to take steps to prohibit the use of these instruments. Now, we can talk a little bit about some of the other reasons why a school district or the city might have entered into some of these agreements, but I think the Auditor General's assessment is probably the better one. The banks, and we list a number of them in the report that were counterparties to these agreements, are among the banks whose other risky investments caused many of them to become financially close to failure. And these banks received in total about $160 billion in funds through the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Many of them have since then returned to profitability. So our recommendations in the report are pretty simple. Citizens of Philadelphia and across the nation have made an investment in these banks in order to keep them healthy, and we believe the banks should make an investment in the city of Philadelphia and its school children, and they can do so by refunding termination fees that have been paid to the School District of Philadelphia, and by waiving or reducing termination fees moving forward for city agencies that would like to exit those agreements in a manner that that saves the taxpayers some money. So the future is uncertain, but one thing we know is that today we are living with a school district that has laid off teachers, that can't afford to keep nurses, that has closed buildings, that has increased class sizes, and we have a city that has been struggling to maintain its economic and financial health, and could very well benefit from having a little bit of assistance in this regard. We believe that the City Council has, in its power, a little bit of leverage to help with these negotiations with the banks, and we would encourage City Council and the administration to do so. Again, not to do so leaves the city and its taxpayers at an additional financial risk that we certainly cannot afford. So let me stop there and let Anne introduce to you some others who